It's very hard to keep all this together now because there's so many of these disparate platforms. The old way of fighting a war was you had a front line, you had two armies facing off on the front line, and that's the way it basically was. They fought across there and tried to get to the other side. But the asymmetrical warfare that Russia has developed over the years has meant that they can go behind the front lines using Facebook, using operatives, using any propaganda techniques to basically fight the war, from behind enemy lines. It's a very simple concept. But they've developed it to such an extent, and we've seen it in Ukraine, we've seen it elsewhere, that it's almost impossible to track. One of the quotes I like the most from Sergei Shogun, who's the Russian Ministry of Defense, is, it's hard to search for a black cat in a dark room, especially if it's not there. And he's right, because the black cat is the influence that's going on in militia groups, or maybe spread through Facebook or elsewhere, or these disinformation. You can't really see you can't catch that thing because it just doesn't exist, but it's affecting so many people, and it's affecting our future really as a republic. It's very hard to see us being able to sort of unify beyond these kind of forces of being amplified and amplifying messages in our country.
Yeah. And, part of the problem is that a lot of folks have just gotten so used to the idea of if they don't understand something, they just throw their hands up and say, well, this is just too complicated. I wrote a 200-page report on the 10 different ways that foreign adversaries targeted service members, veterans, and our families, with everything from disinformation campaigns to stealing the identities of those killed in action to engage in romance scam using their person, right? Not one person has been held accountable for any of the wrongdoing that I've exposed in my report. And it's not, okay, we can't go and extradite Russians. It's just not going to happen. But no one at Facebook who allowed this to happen, who I was sending emails to with early versions of my report, being completely open to them, saying like, here's a spreadsheet of 160 fake pages pretending to be American veterans run by foreigners. No one at Facebook is being held accountable.
Isn't that unbelievable?
And that's what's most frustrating to me.
It's so frustrating. Yeah. And they're not the kind of company that you can expect them to do anything. They just won't. They've proven they're not that interested in working on behalf of the American people. It's frustrating. But then tell us about your experience of getting into this militia group, because you then infiltrated a militia group. So tell us about that really interesting chapter of your life.
So in the days leading up to the publication of this report, I had a friend who I served with in the Army call me up and say, hey, I joined a hate group and I want you to help me take them out. We had never had a discussion about this before. It was a completely random phone call. And this is the kind of guy who anytime that he calls me, something crazy happens. Time prior to that, he called me within 4 hours. I was on a tiny little plane flying into West Virginia to basically help our friend in a hospital. And then I ended up pretending to be an inpatient to get this. Things are crazy, right? I ended up sleeping on a mental health ward last time this guy called me to save one of our buddies who was really messed up from the war. So he calls me, tells me, join this hate group, wants me to help him take him out. Now, this is a good reminder. There are a lot of folks who keep their eyes on DC, who keep their eyes on the news like me, and I'll take a photo with the senator. Well, people who never pay attention to the news and never care about elections, which is a lot of Americans. They have their own things to worry about in their own lives, their own families. They see a photo of me with the senator, they start to think I can do all sorts of things that I can't. Like, I can't just call up the FBI and say, hey, let's take out a hate group today.
Right.
That's not how things work.
Yeah.
So I told my buddy, listen, I'm going through a lot right now, about to publish this massive report, which includes some stuff on Russia. So I'm probably going to be a target. So I can't join a hate group right now with you. Right? So fast forward a year later. Now COVID's a thing. I get laid off from Vietnam Veterans America because the donations dry up. And I call my buddy back and I say, well, I've got a lot of time on my hands. I had just graduated. I had gone from being a full-time student, working full-time remotely, to graduating and getting laid off the same week. And I joined a hate group with him. And so the first one that I joined was called Patriot Front. Patriot Front is the most active hate group in the United States, and no one's ever heard of. They are primarily Gen Z, different from the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, the household names, because they're not idiots. These are kids
These are guys
who grew
fly
up
under
with
the
cell
radar.
phones. Yeah, these are guys who grew up with cell phones in their hands, who have been on Instagram since they were tweens. And they know how to build an audience and keep an audience engaged. They know how to build a social movement. And what you're looking at right now, all of these masked kids, these are young men who are between 18 and 35. Unlike the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers, they have an age cap. Can't be older than 35 years old. Why? Because they want to invest in propagandizing and investing in young fighting age males. So that when they engage in a day like January 6th, it's going to be a hell of a lot more bloody than what we saw at the Capitol.
No, they weren't there on January 6th, as far as we know. I mean, maybe they were there as other groups, but not there. This is their leader, Thomas Rousseau. He seems so young. He just seems like a kid. Like, I mean, really? This is the leader of this giant movement?
He considers himself the Caesar of the white race. He's a 22, maybe 23-year-old who lives in Grapevine, Texas, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So something that I don't know if he knows this yet, but around the election, I had infiltrated this group and I was documenting, basically learning everything about them because I had access to all of their chat logs in real time. So I was watching them, screenshotting every bit of it, logging in multiple times a day because they automatically delete their things every few hours so that I could stay on top of everything. Gave it all to BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed published an article just days before the election. Now, our intent with exposing this organization was to take them offline specifically for the election. They are very decentralized in terms of communication. They have learned a lot since Charlottesville, when a lot of them were doxxed and had to pay social and economic costs. Like we just saw, now some of them millions of dollars in debt because they lost the Charlottesville lawsuit.
They view Charlottesville as a bit of a trap, right? I think many of them
correct.
do.
Yeah. They consider it like a honeypot. Now, Thomas Rousseau, he actually handed a weapon to James Fields, the person who ran over Heather Heyer and the group of peaceful protesters and killed Heather Heyer. Thomas Rousseau somehow escaped the Charlottesville lawsuit, but justice is still coming for him. So I'll tell you an example of how to sabotage an organization like this. So we joined this organization, got all the screenshots, gave it to BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed comes out with the article just days before the election. I print out 200 copies of it. Found out where this kid lived because his address is part of the public record because he was arrested for putting up racist propaganda near his hometown. And I mailed 200 copies of the BuzzFeed article with a dossier, with his arrest records, pictures of his house and pictures of his car to everyone in his neighborhood. Literally drew a circle for a quarter mile around his house. And let everyone within a quarter mile know that they're living next to not just a neo-Nazi, but the headquarters of the largest, most active hate group in the United States. So
that's a very smart idea. It had an impact, presumably. Presumably he wasn't happy. Did you ever hear from him?
They went underground. They went underground for a little while, then popped their heads back up.
But who funds them? Who funds these guys? Who funds the Patriot Front? Where are they getting all this money from to organize this organization? Where are they getting all this knowledge from? It seems like, is this really a natural upswelling of white nationalism, or is it something that's been constructed elsewhere?
A lot of these people have day jobs. They're members of our society, and they are, nighttime Nazis, just like the Klan. They go and they put on, instead of a hood, they put on their white mask. Now, what makes these guys different from the Three Percenters, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, these kids, and I call them kids because I have no respect for them and they're fucking morons, they immerse themselves in Nazi propaganda and fascist propaganda, everything from Mussolini on, and are taking the propaganda efforts that were effective in leading to the Holocaust and applying their 21st century knowledge and skill set to it. So with that, they were viral on TikTok before anyone knew what they were.
Yeah.
So when they, one of the most common ways that these new white extremist organizations spread their hate is they go around and they post stickers and flyers with their logo, their name, a message of hate, and then their website address on it. They'll post it outside a synagogue or on a college campus, some diverse neighborhood, somewhere where it's going to generate outrage. So a well-meaning journalist takes a photo of it, or well-meaning anybody takes a photo of it, posts it online and says like, hey, look, I found neo-Nazis on this college campus near the synagogue in this neighborhood. And then if 1,000 people see that tweet with their web address on it, all it takes is one sympathetic person. Now they've got an applicant. So they have been using our outrage against us to do their recruiting and find the one out of 1,000 people who have views in any way sympathetic to their own.
Earlier this year in this narrative season, we ran a story about Charles Bausman, who's a Russian, one would think operative. He acts like a Russian operative, walks like a operative. Let's call him an operative for our purposes here, who had a barn up in Pennsylvania, where amongst other things, he held the launch meeting of the National Justice Party, which is basically the neo-Nazi party of America. So here's a Russian operative thinking, well, I can get all these guys together. No one else is going to let them host anything. Give them the barn. They can host their event. And now he's, influencing hundreds, maybe thousands of Americans into thinking that the neo-Nazis is a cult worth following. Or there's the National Justice Party is a cult worth following. and succeeds. I mean, at the end of the day, the party now exists. It must get funding from somewhere. Maybe it also gets funding from the Russians. It's a similar kind of thing with this. It might be that there are some foreign actors as well who just find this useful in their, attempt to sow chaos and might be helping these guys along.
So Nick Fuentes, who was just outside the Capitol, who was telling his followers that the police were the enemy as they were running up to the Capitol to attack them, break into, our citadel of democracy. Nick Fuentes received what is now the equivalent of over $1 million in Bitcoin donations from a European white extremist who eventually just, gave away all his Bitcoin money and then killed himself. These folks are trying to not just create a white American ethno-state, they're trying to balkanize the white world from the rest of the world. So their organizations like White Lives Matter are not just producing propaganda for white people in the United States, they're doing it for white Russians, they're doing it for white Ukrainians, for white Italians. They are all over the Western world. And their stated goal is to create semi-autonomous cells who are ready to be called to action. So like what we saw on January 6th, those were a bunch of maniacs who, for the most part, were coming in small cells. They were willing to storm the Capitol in what was the greatest attack on our democracy so far. These folks are planning for 20 years down the line. That's why they're aiming for people in our fighting age males right now, because they want 20 years from now, these people to be in their mid 40s, still able to, swing a baseball bat at a cop, but have, a dozen people in their 20s behind them ready to.
That's a very long-term horizon. These are not kids that are coming up with a strategy. And obviously, these are people who are thinking very, very far ahead. And it strikes me that, none of this is good for America. It's certainly troubling to think about what's driving them. You suggest it's just the white nationalism, but there's got to be. I think about the Macedonian that you encountered, as I did way back when, about this Macedonian troll farms that the Russians basically set up in Macedonia to create all this propaganda into the American zeitgeist during the 2016 election. Now, those Macedonian kids had nothing to do. They were smart. They spoke English. They had nothing to do. There was zero economic opportunity there. When the Russians showed up and said, hey, here's, $20 or whatever it is they gave them to write a per story about Hillary Clinton, they didn't care. They wrote the story about Hillary Clinton because they wanted the money. It might be that we're seeing some of that financial incentives being offered to these kids as well.
Well, what we saw with the Macedonians, I take what I say now with a grain of salt because it's an extremely small focus group, right? But the Arsov brothers are who we're talking about, the Macedonians.
Yeah.
The Arsov brothers in the beginning, they're getting paid. They'll, hire 100 people, pay them $1 a day a piece and have them write, stories about Hillary Clinton, having dementia or something. They didn't care. But now, today, those Arsov brothers, they're true believers. They really love Trump. And that is, I think, the effect that these propaganda campaigns have had on a lot of Americans who initially supported Trump in 2015, thinking it was a joke because they like to, troll the lib and piss people off. Now they're true believers because they've been so wedded to pretending to care, to pretending to be attached to this guy, that now they have convinced themselves that they are indeed Trump fans. And that's why those are the type of people who you saw storming the Capitol. Those
so pernicious. It's so dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just facing an awful calamity if this continues. And so in the few minutes we have left, I want to just try to get you pick your brain here about what it is we can do to stop this. I mean, it seems kind of like it's impossible to stop, but we must figure out a way. What do you think the best strategies are to fight this information?
So there are sociologists and psychologists and all sorts of academic folks who have better answers than this. I'll give you the answer that a soldier can come up with. And that's impose costs on these people. Right now, they are trying to build what they call a parallel economy. Specifically, this is led by Andrew Torba of Gab. They are trying to create online job boards. So if you're a neo-Nazi, you get outed in your neighborhood, you just go on the neo-Nazi help wanted website and you've got a job in your local neighborhood. They're trying to make it so that when folks are identified and have, lose their job, lose their girlfriend, well, now they can go on to white supremacist Tinder. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. No. I mean, the reason why they're becoming so brazen, but for, the 9 people who were held responsible for Charlottesville, the rest of them went on to create the National Justice Party. And now they're receiving donations from neo-Nazis across the world. They're coordinating with fascist militias in Ukraine, and they're getting to see Europe, going overseas and training to fight with these people.
Yeah.
These folks are no different from the jihadist extremists that Americans were so afraid of for the last 20 years. they've been radicalized and they're willing to go overseas and train to fight so that they can come home and bring that skill set here.
And they have the money, they have the resources, they have the weapons, and they really are trying to, create an insurgency in this country. I mean, that seems to be the goal. And for a long time, it feels to really rip apart the country. If they need to, they will separate parts of some of these states out of the United States. And of course, that just obviously weakens America tremendously. But you still haven't answered the question. How do you stop them? Other than you impose costs, you said, but what else can we do as, ordinary citizens? Is there something that we could be doing in our daily lives that could reach across to reach them? I mean, is there a way to get to them? Is there a way to communicate with them and discuss that?
I am I'm not going to pretend that I'm not a hate-filled person. I hate Nazis, and I have no interest in rehabilitating Nazis. I want to impose social and economic and legal costs on them in every way that I can. And the way that a regular person, you don't have to be spending all your time in neo-Nazi Telegram chat to do this. Simply go on Twitter and just use the Twitter search bar and look for anti-fascist and just follow all the anti-fascist accounts that you can. Once in a while, you're going to see an anti-fascist account that is in your neighborhood and they're going to dox a Nazi. And it's up to you as the person who lives in that neighborhood to make sure that your neighbors who are probably not on Twitter are notified so that they know that a Nazi lives in their neighborhood. If I were one of Thomas Rousseau's neighbors and, a couple days after the election, I got a package with that dossier, I would have been really appreciative. I would like to know if there was a Nazi on the other side of the block, because that's a safety threat. I want to let my local police know that if, they find a swastika burned into the schoolyard grass, that's probably the guy who did it, right?
I think that's a good answer. That's, you're telling us to be conscious in our neighborhoods of what's going on. And these are local stories. These are things that show up locally. And it's just about whether people take action. Oftentimes, I think people get really scared at the idea of taking action in any of these situations. But I think as we are learning tonight, it's a big problem we're having. And it's a continuing and growing problem in America. And it could lead to the very destruction of this country. It certainly feels like we haven't, many people think that January the 6th was sort of the end of things. It really wasn't. It's sort of just the first in many chapters, maybe.
And another local action thing, and you might have seen me say this on Nicole Wallace's show, is folks ought to start going to their school board meetings, their local school board meetings. If you watch Fox News, you'll see that there are crazy people, Proud Boys showing up in full uniform, the yellow and black, the body armor, the helmets. You're seeing the 3%ers, the Oath Keepers show up at these places. People who are not crazy also need to show up because you need to show those who live in your neighborhood, who have run for that school board, who are doing a job that they might not be even getting paid for, that them staying in that position is worth it because the community has their back. Because what the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the Proud Boys, and the neo-Nazis want to do is they want to create vacancies on those school boards so that they can just run for those vacant positions. Next thing you know, you have a neo-Nazi who's determining what textbooks your kids can read. Right. I mean, that's a real threat in this country right now, and it's happening. So folks who are really concerned about this stuff, just go to the meeting. You don't have to get in a fight with these people. Just sit down and just clap and support your local legislator. I
mean, it's unbelievable what the Supreme Court did today, just in that hearing on abortion. It's sort of, it makes you think anything is possible, really. If the Supreme Court that reactionary who could go down to abortion just at 15 weeks, then, it could be anything. Really, it's kind of a dismaying time to be an American. But thank you very much, Chris. I'm glad you're here tonight, and I thank you very much for being with us. Tell everyone where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find your organization, and anything else you want to promote. Feel free to do that.
Sure. So one of the organizations I have to give a shout out to is Veterans for American Ideals. Veterans for American Ideals is a project of human rights first, and we're not just about fighting extremists and trying to stop extremism from impacting the military and veterans community. We're trying to help Afghans settle in the United States, our allies who are overseas. We're helping them become the newest Americans. And you want to piss off a Nazi? Help make an Afghan an American. I mean, that's like the most mean thing you can do to a Nazi. So Veterans for American Ideals, VFAI.org. You can find me on Twitter at KRIS Goldsmith85. That's the best way if you want to get into contact with me. I try to respond to most of my messages.
And it's Sparvarius is the company you run, which is the open source intelligence organization you have. You've been so helpful tonight to connect these dots, which I think is so important. It's so important for everyone to realize that, the insurrection didn't happen out of nothing. The insurrection came out of militia groups, and militia groups came out of something as well. And they came out of the propaganda efforts that were started earlier as 2015, probably, but maybe even sooner than that, on Facebook and elsewhere to radicalize American troops and veterans who are coming back from there. And that's how we landed up with this radicalized group of people who, stormed the Capitol on January the 6th. And that very serious act that I know a lot of people want to just turn away from and ignore is bringing other terrible things to this country, including these, neo-Nazi groups that you talk about, the Patriot Front and others. There's just so much that needs to be understood that comes out of this propaganda effort that started in 2015 and that led into these militia groups. That is not going to be curtailed by turning our back on the events of January the 6th and ignoring it. We have to confront it. We need to see justice being done there, and we need to see justice being done really quickly because we don't have much time before the next election, and who knows what will happen if the Democrats don't win the House. So a lot of good reason to stay motivated and to stay politically active as we head into 22. So there you go. Thanks very much for watching Narrative tonight. Thanks, Chris. Anything else you want to share with our audience? They seem to love having you on, and I've got lots of good comments from you. Anything else?
Thanks. I'm excited to come back sometime. So please let me know next time you want to talk about the bad guys, and we'll talk about bringing the pain their way.
Absolutely. We'll do that. Thanks very much for being here tonight. And thank you for watching. You can always catch us on YouTube. If you're not yet a subscriber on YouTube, we suggest you go over there and subscribe there. Plus, you can always support us at patreon.com/narrative. And that's the show for tonight. I have some disappointing news for everybody because there won't be an after show this Friday, but the after show will be back next Friday, and I'll be back next Tuesday with a continuing episode of our January the 6th investigation. Have a good night, everybody. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.